Sam Pick was out on patrol in a small Lincolnshire town. He was a special sergeant, a volunteer police officer. It was a Saturday night. The pubs and clubs were bustling. Calls had been coming through about a guy who'd been behaving, as Sam puts it, semi-aggressively throughout the night.
It got to a point towards the end of the evening where I believe he was involved in a minor assault in a pub. I suddenly got a load of people shouting that this had happened. And I knew who it was.
It was 2020. Earlier that year, George Floyd had been killed by a Minneapolis police officer, propelling Black Lives Matter into a global phenomenon.
And I can remember that brief moment where I thought, I can chase after this guy, and potentially I can get it. Maybe I can, maybe I can't, but I can do it. But it will be messy. The reality of hands-on policing on a Saturday night is it doesn't look good on camera. And I was in the middle of the town centre in a post-BLM world with people holding up smartphones, filming what was going on. And I knew how it would look if I actually chased him down and did the arrest. And in that brief moment, and you're talking about a very brief moment, 1 or 2 seconds before it was too late, I stood still. And that wasn't how I would have policed just a year earlier.
If he'd been a white guy, would you have chased after him?
Yes, because I wouldn't have had that 1 or 2 seconds worth of hesitation.
This is delicate stuff. Overt police brutality directly led to BLM and a wider reckoning on race. Police and fire forces in the US and UK have long faced accusations and solid evidence of racism, sexism and bullying, all of which needs calling out. But it's also reasonable to ask, has the push for diversity and the culture it's ushered in some ways impacted our emergency services?
I'd find myself waiting for backup much more than I would have done, for instance, early on. And that wasn't necessarily because I didn't think I was physically capable of dealing with the situation. It was simply because I wanted somebody else there to witness what was likely to happen. Definitely post George Floyd, BLM. DEI became a pretty central point in British policing.
I'm Tim Samuels. Welcome to episode 4 of White Men Can't Work, the podcast and YouTube show voicing what it's truly like for men working in today's world of DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion, and how the heck we got here. As we saw in the previous shows, an activist form of diversity spread through academia and corporate life, tossing aside free speech and fairness, seeing billions pledged, quotas rolled out, even Lego policemen taken off duty. It's one thing for Starbucks to drink the Kool-Aid frappe, but quite another when DEI takes root in our emergency services.
We're absolutely bursting at the seams with individuals who are not competent. Absolutely bursting at the seams.
When it gets rolled out to medical professionals.
You're going to turn to them and say, we want to explore these hidden biases we think you might have that might be causing disparate outcomes among people of color. It's insulting. It's outrageous.
And forgive me for being all evidence-based, but amidst the countless training courses, eye-watering fortunes spent, lives disrupted and values trashed, shouldn't someone ask the fundamental question, does DEI even work? Does it meaningfully help those it was meant to?
No group, no underrepresented group, that is white women or any group of people of color, actually sees a significant positive effect.
That's all coming your way on White Men Can't Work, which, if you think is half decent, please subscribe on my YouTube channel. United Airlines had something it wanted to shout about. The 2021 press release trumpeted, United sets diversity goal, 50% of students at new pilot training academy to be women and people of colour. It detailed an ambitious plan to train 5,000 new pilots by 2030, at least half of them women and people of colour. Two thoughts instantly competed for attention. One, great, how progressive, in an industry where, in the US, less than 5% of pilots are female and 6% are black or minority descent. Two, less honourably, will this feel quite as great when you're 30,000 feet up? Are they really going to pull off such a wholesale transformation without at all compromising meritocracy? Oh, and a third thought, if I was already a highly skilled female or black pilot, How would I feel about this? Ensuring the very best candidates get to become pilots, regardless of gender or race, is deeply laudable, and some talented people are clearly being excluded because of their gender or race. But it was the rigid quota that jumped out, going from a few percent of women and minorities to more than 50%, and doing this in less than a decade. Cue the predictable posts on X. Want to die for the sake of hiring quotas? Welcome aboard United. The sudden quota, an overnight fix to complex problems, it all feels just too performative, too much about the quick PR hit. And airlines aren't the only life or death sector rushing to drive home DEI. Toronto Metropolitan University announced last year it was reserving 3/4 of its medical school places for non-white students, for whom lower grades wouldn't necessarily rule them out, before being forced to cave. The RAF, the UK's Royal Air Force, was forced to admit its diversity targets discriminated against white men. An inquiry found more than 31 men were sidelined, whilst women and minorities got fast-tracked, as the RAF dashed to become 40% female and 20% ethnic minority origin by 2030. Targets, they now concede, are unrealistic. 3 white male Thames Valley police officers were passed over for promotion because of their race, a judge ruled, after a lower-ranking Asian sergeant was appointed without a competitive process. And a number of firefighters have been in touch with concerns about the diversity drive affecting standards.
I'm a female working for the fire service, and white males are definitely getting overlooked for new firefighter roles. Due to the government pushing for a diverse workforce, it's definitely gone too far.
She asked for anonymity, hence an avatar speaking her words, as has, let's call him Greg, another serving firefighter. He agrees that the culture needed to change.
I accept that it's probably a better place. I've spoken to a lot of guys who were in before me in the 70s, and they speak about real discrimination and about bullying, this type of bullying that went on. But I can honestly say, in my career, I think it's always been a welcoming place. I don't think incompetent people are welcome. I think incompetent people get a hard time.
To attract more women into fire services, a number of forces have acknowledged lowering some of the strength-based tests, which, Greg says, has also opened the door to men who'd previously have been too unfit.
We'll do everything at a walking pace, because we all have to go at the pace of the weakest link. So if there's an individual who can't run around with a 115 kilogram ladder, then we'll all have to walk with that 115 kilogram ladder. And that's what we're at. There are plenty of women who could carry that, run about with that 115 kilogram ladder. There's plenty of women who can lift those really heavy spreaders, and sometimes those women are the most vocal about other women coming in. It's like the white man being vocal about the fat white man. He can say about that, but there's often women who are there on their merit, and they are the most aggrieved that other people have got in, maybe based on what's between their legs or what's not between their legs rather than their competency. We're absolutely bursting at the seams with individuals who are not competent, absolutely bursting at the seams. I think of one particular incident at a high school that was on fire, and we could have nipped it in the bud early on, but we weren't aggressive enough, and there was too many people hiding, and we stood back and it got hold and we lost the whole building. It was humiliating. It really was humiliating. And I think that if there had been a different approach, if we'd been more aggressive, maybe more old school, it would have been nipped in the bud earlier.
I'm going out on a limb here, but I don't think many firefighters will reach for Cato's letters to Caesar to critique the way DEI has been implemented in the service.
There's abject sycophancy and blind submission prove the only means of preferment and indeed of safety. Men durst not open their mouths but to flatter. And that's talking about what happens when you have something that is an unjust power is put into force.
Rory Barclay taught all over the world before settling in an English village and becoming a full-time firefighter. He can no longer keep quiet about the changes he's seen.
It's been something that's been very hard to think about. I've been advised by people to hide myself. I said that my career might be on the line, but deep down, I feel that we should be able to speak freely and have a discussion.
Like Greg, he too has seen standards adjusted in the name of diversity.
someone failed the initial fitness test and was allowed to come back where other people passed it with flying colours. So there were aspects about that individual that they wanted to hire. So that was problematic. It's tough to talk about because, these are sensitive subjects and it makes me sound bitter. But again, it's not. It's because I want people to be proud of what they passed, and people then felt disheartened.
What irks Rory is the cultural shift brought about by diversity training, which draws from those Marxist 70s roots of dividing everyone into oppressor or oppressed.
For me, it just feels like there's a lot of negative views of people first. That's just not how I live my life. If you let the reasonable little man in there, the biggest part of you, it speaks to the reasonable person and whoever you're discussing with. I see people as wanting to come to work and be good. I see people that want to be professional. And hopefully if I see them as that, I'll bring that out there. And I think if we see people as problematic, as racists and sexists, are we more likely to bring out negative qualities?
DEI has sanitized what people say at work. No bad thing in some cases, but it also risks snuffing out a vital coping mechanism.
We get on with people and we have to work closely together. We have to trust people. And there is an element of jokes. On my watch, everyone takes it in good spirit and gives it back. It's part of who we are as a team. We have to trust each other, and sometimes a poke here and there is a way of seeing if someone breaks under pressure. We need to work under pressure.
At his station, Greg says nowadays crews keep to themselves during downtime. People are paranoid about making a career-ending joke.
I think there's a lot of dark humour, How do you justify dark humour? But how do you deal with coming back for that child under the bus? How do you deal with that? You make a sick joke and you all have a laugh about it, But if people are on guard where they come back from that and they can't talk about it or deal with it, it's like, then there's a consequence to that. So I think we'll lose something. It's like the mechanisms for coping with these things is lost.
Firefighters are not alone in keeping stum at work. Our JL Partners polling found that nearly half, 46% of white men, self-censor from making a joke or giving honest but respectful feedback to colleagues because of fears it could affect their careers. That's 11 million men in the UK too scared to speak freely, equivalent to more than 53 million men in the US. It's these shifts in culture which can be so telling. Policeman Sam Pick pausing before failing to give chase. Firefighters no longer hanging out together in the rec room. And so too in our hospitals.
So that's my backyard. That's the Cuyahoga River down there. That river runs from northeastern Ohio, and Cuyahoga means crooked river. So it has a lot of bends in it. It runs from northeastern Ohio, swings around and empties in downtown Cleveland into Lake Erie.
Cleet Weigel has a lot more time to admire the view these days. For 37 years, his days were spent as a senior nurse, overseeing rehabilitation programs.
Yeah, I mean, that's my field, because I had a bunch of years in cardiac rehab, and I took care of patients that had had bypass surgery and were home recovering. So it was a very rewarding setting, both home care and cardiac rehab, because you work with patients that, for the most part, really appreciate what you're doing.
As a medical professional, the culture naturally Cleet adhered to was evidence-led, what treatments will actually work for patients. So when the hospital introduced a diversity initiative, he was curious about its efficacy.
The thing that I remember that really kicked it off for me was the CEO of the hospital has employee, does little videos, like 4 or 5 minute videos weekly for the entire hospital on what's going on. And one particular week, they had a consultant there. He said, what do you recommend for our workforce? What would help them, in terms of resources? And she said, I recommend they read Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility. So I got the book. I actually got the audio version and listened to it. And I was horrified by what I heard. I thought, my gosh, this is the most racist book I've ever heard. She's condemning white people. She's condemning whiteness. Like whiteness is a trait that dooms you. You can't get rid of it. You must try. You have to repent the rest of your life. And I just thought, this is crazy. I mean, if I really, I thought this doesn't make sense. And I thought, if this consultant is telling our CEO, your workforce should read this book, it explained my life to me, I'd be horrified if our whole workforce read that book and bought into it. It would destroy any trust we have in one another.
Implicit bias training followed, part of an attempt to address the higher maternal mortality rates amongst black women in the state.
We're a medical facility that treats people and tries to help people based on evidence-based medicine. And what you're doing here is not evidence-based at all. You're presuming that this part of the workforce is racist and biased and probably causing the disparities in health outcomes of these types of patients. And I feel it's a totally erroneous assumption and very destructive. The other thing is, assuming I'm right, then while you're doing all this, you have women who are dying at a higher rate in infants, and you're not really looking for the real cause. You're blaming it on the white people because they don't have the right attitudes and whatever. Yeah, there are many things that contribute to a higher mortality rate, and these are well known. They're not just assumed. Cigarette smoking and poor diet and not taking medications and poverty and instability in the home and lack of transportation and illiteracy and school system. I mean, there's so many disruptive forces in the culture that can cause disparate outcomes that, well, it's much more likely that that's the source of the problem. And it'll be very tough to change those things, but certainly won't change it by talking to the white people and saying, let's fix your implicit bias. What we're going to do is alienate people and destroy communication channels.
When Cleet questioned the DEI training when he asked for data, he was given an ultimatum: do more implicit bias training or lose your job. So he quit.
What does this say to nurses who have been working with these patients 20, 30 years with, I'm sure, a great deal of passion and care and skill? And you're going to turn to them and say, well, we want to explore these hidden biases we think you might have that might be causing disparate outcomes among people of color. It's insulting. It's outrageous.
There's a pattern. Ask for the data that DEI works, and you're a troublemaker. Dorian Abbott, the Chicago geophysicist in episode 2, given a re-education ultimatum, Cleet, in Ohio. Impediments to a righteous path, who just need more training to see the light, rather than the data they yearn for as men of science. In London, Professor Carol Sikora is also a stickler for evidence. A good thing, given his job.
I'm an oncologist. I'm an academic oncology professor and chairman at Imperial College, Hammersmith, Charing Cross and St Mary's in oncology for 25 years. Joined the WHO as Director of Cancer Services for a couple of years on secondment, and then set up a group of cancer centres in the UK and abroad. And that's what I do now, and I carry on working, building cancer centres.
As well as taking time out to go on DEI training.
Every year we have to do one. For my appraisal, we have to do a diversity course. It's the same every year, and it's almost insulting. Everyone realizes what it is. I mean, we joke about it. Vividly remember that she showed a video of an old man sitting on a park bench and some youths around him throwing beer bottles at him, or beer cans, empty beer cans at the old man. And she said, "How do you feel about that?" I said, "Why are you asking us? I mean, obviously it's disgraceful, but, that it happens, And she wasn't content with that. She wanted to say, "But what about the ethnic group of the males throwing the can? What's it matter? It doesn't matter whether they're black, white, or yellow. They're doing bad, She was trying to racialize what was clearly nothing to do with race. This seemed so stupid. And I think that's the problem with people in the diversity business. They obviously go away on courses, more advanced courses than I've ever done, I assume, and come up with these rather bizarre ideas that we should learn. And I think most doctors struggle. And it's because I think we're all used to diversity in healthcare. We don't think of it. We don't racialize people. We don't. Rich, poor, it doesn't matter. They're the patient in front of you. You do what you can, the best for them. I think the problem that I have with it is there's no evidence of value for money. What are they actually doing all day? And what they are doing is troubling other people that are trying to do their job, trying to make them think about diversity. So the NHS has enough bureaucracy as it is, and to add another layer with diversity, how can we employ someone at 100,000 a year unless there's evidence that they're actually going to do some good?
Speaking which, here's a job being advertised for an equality, diversity and inclusion champion for the Women's Health Network in the Welsh NHS.
They do not need to be subject matter experts, but will need to demonstrate they have experience in leading the system and organisational/service change, essential, appropriate professional registration, understanding national guidance, good understanding of the principles of clinical governance, blah, blah, blah. How much of the NHS's budget do you think would be reasonable to pay for that person's post?
I think nothing, to be honest. I think it's just, it's Mickey Mouse to think that someone can come and change it.
How much do you think the NHS have advertised this post for? How much is the salary?
I would have thought between 50 and 100,000, maybe even over 100.
You're a little stingy. It goes up to 139,882 pounds a year.
Okay. So we get 3 or 4 nurses, 3.5 nurses. You could get, 6 healthcare assistants. Okay.
Sure, a bunch of white men might waft aside DEI as an insulting waste of money based on ideology, not evidence. After all, as those slides shown to trainee NHS clinical psychologists on Whiteness Day, as we saw in episode 3, told the class, whiteness is not meant to be seen, and in fact, NHS service policies, our daily practices, our language reproduce whiteness and uphold notions of racial hierarchies and bolsters institutional racism. So I took a moment out from allegedly reproducing whiteness to speak to Monica Moore to get her perspective on what it's like to be a young black trainee doctor. Monica is studying medicine at Brown University in Rhode Island. We heard her reaction to George Floyd's killing in the previous show.
It just spoke on a level of exhaustion that I personally have. I think I've seen it in my community, but I've also just seen it within myself. It's just tiredness of when is this ever going to stop, or who will it be next?
Has your life in any way benefited since George Floyd?
I would say it has not changed. Not in a bad or a good way. It has not changed in a bad or a good way. A lot of lives around me changed. A lot of thought processes changed. A lot of people were more open to difficult conversations about racism and discrimination in America, and about how blatant it is at certain times and how also subtle it is at certain times.
Monica is at med school on merit. She's not a DEI pick. Affirmative action at colleges was sanctioned by the Supreme Court in 1978 over a case involving admissions to medical school, then outlawed in 2023. Monica's there on her grades. A diversity program does assist with fees and mentoring.
Yeah, so I was raised in a lower income family, so I wasn't necessarily poor, but we weren't the most financially stable at most times. So I would say that we had a roof over our head, thank God, and we had food, but a lot of times we weren't the most financially stable. So there was just a lot of sacrifices that as kids that we learned that we had to make.
And what's the area of medicine that you want to specialize in?
Pulmonology, and I know everybody's like, "What?" Like, it's usually like OBG or pediatrics, but I've always been interested in the lungs. I've had chronic eye conditions when I was younger, and my family, they've had COPD and different things of that sort. My mom would take me to so many doctors that they didn't know what to do, they didn't know how to treat me. So yeah, I'm just all about the lungs. So I don't know if it'll change once it goes to med school. My mentors have told me it might change. But right now, that's like been my biggest thing since high school.
And how difficult has it been for you or not as a young Black woman to get on this path to medicine?
I would say it's been pretty difficult. Just getting it in my mind that I wanted to be a doctor was such a long shot as a kid. And so going into high school and my professor, not my professor, my counselors were like, well, you're so great. Maybe you should be a teacher or something. And it wasn't like they were kind of like belittling me. They were just, they were just saying that's such a hard thing to do.
Monica is firmly opposed to the plan Toronto Med School had for quotas of relaxing standards for minority applicants, but she does support diversity training for doctors.
I do believe that medicine as a whole needs a diversity program because of one book in particular, and this book is called Medical Apartheid, and it's one of the most profound books that I've ever read, and it talks about medical racism. And for context, let's say this woman is a woman of color, and she goes into preterm labor, and the complications are so bad due to something that wasn't noticed before that her and the baby passed away. And it was because, in some senses, some people feel as though when it comes to certain women of color, that they can tolerate pain more, or that their pain might be an exaggeration more. And so they end up with complications that could have been resolved beforehand, and ultimately sometimes, in some cases, ends up being fatal because of some things that could have been treated.
I've not seen that, but I guess if that is the case, then that presumably is a kind of an unconscious bias. Doctors aren't going out of their way to,
So that's why I think the diversity program is so needed, because this isn't a fault of the doctors, it's an unconscious bias.
A program's needed, but not in the way DEI has been rolled out, not with that ideology rooted in division.
I definitely think it could have been done differently, because at the end of the day, we're all here together. There's no like completely wiping out one, and I wouldn't want that either. And so I definitely think that kind of just putting a black and a white in two different boxes and saying this one needs this and this one doesn't need this, I don't think it helped anyone. I definitely think it was counterproductive. I don't think it helped anyone, because now we need every color in every room. Like we need that.
Monica and the experience of Clete Weigel in Ohio and Professor Carol Sikora in London get to the crux of this whole DEI business. Inequality does need addressing. Discrimination is real and odious. But it's the way DEI has been rolled out. It's been simplistic, ideological, counterproductive. If there are specific blind spots like Black women being undertreated for pain, then absolutely educate doctors. But don't run courses telling medical professionals they're all racist. If people like Monica are growing up without the confidence or contacts to apply for medicine, then let's do everything possible to remove those barriers. But that's not an easy overnight fix. Professor Sikora was dean of a medical school.
The only way is not to take 15-year-olds or 18-year-olds. It's too late by then. You've got to have education programs for high and intelligent people when they're much younger. And when you do get people into medical school, you've got to nurture them and give them the aspiration to go to the top of their careers, because they're not getting it necessarily from their homes, from their peer group, their friends, their siblings, their parents.
More on better ways to do DEI in the next final episode. And if you're going to spend billions and disrupt the lives of so many workers across so many sectors, then at least have the data that DEI fundamentally works. Surely this has become a $10 to $20 billion industry championed by our biggest companies based on solid evidence?
Often companies themselves don't want to look under the rock. They don't necessarily want to know whether the things they are doing are effective. A lot of times CEOs want programs that will appease their audience, whatever that is.
Frank Dobbin, our Harvard professor of sociology, together with his colleague, Professor Alexandra Kalev at Tel Aviv, who couldn't make the interviews, has been doing what companies haven't, actually crunching the data on DEI.
Well, the general pattern is that companies seem to want to blame their own employees for a lack of diversity or for any inequality in career outcomes for Black and white employees or in recruitment outcomes for Black and white and Hispanic and Asian American employees or potential employees, and try to address them with diversity training, which is right now, it's designed to make people understand that bias is widespread through some version of implicit bias training, that they themselves are biased. And then it usually turns to the punishments for employees who are biased. So what would happen to you if somebody filed a grievance against you? Typically, those are the main messages that all diversity training programs get across. They just don't work.
They just don't work. That's what the data shows.
There have been more than 1,000 studies of diversity trainings, mostly designed by psychologists. So the programs that ought to work, showing weak or no effects of most of these trainings on actual bias, on unconscious bias, or what's called implicit bias. When we look at what happens in the lab after training, they don't seem to work. In our research, we look at hundreds of companies over dozens of years. Our current data set has 8 million workers. And we're looking at what happens after they put in specific kinds of programs. So when companies put in conventional diversity training programs of the kind I talked about, they see decreases, not increases, in the diversity of their own managers, not only frontline workers, but managers. So that's discouraging. No group, no underrepresented group, that is white women or any group of people of color, actually sees a significant positive effect. And we see a pattern of negative effects. So, I think what happens is diversity training of this sort often makes white men especially defensive. Like they don't want to be told that they're racist. Nobody thinks they're racist. It can make them act out, can make them aggressive.
So, just to be clear, these programs rolled out across our major institutions and companies at the cost of billions don't help minorities and don't help women, don't help the very people they were intended to, and in fact make things worse.
That's exactly what we see, and I don't know of any other studies that contradict what we see in our research. There are better ways to do training, and there are better ways to do complaints, but very few companies use the better methods.
Is it the fundamental reason for this failure is, are you saying a backlash because it's putting white men especially on the defensive? It's accusing them of having implicit bias, accusing them of being problematic, making them fearful for their jobs. Is that the kind of nub of why they're failing?
It appears to be. Many people from many groups don't have a good experience during diversity trainings. Many people come out of them thinking this was a waste of time, but white men often come out thinking I was targeted and I'm not racist. They're wrong about me. This whole thing is ridiculous. The complaints have been overstated. Same is true for sexual harassment training, and these grievance processes.
But wait, DEI proponents might cry. Despite the needlessly needled men and failure to tangibly help women and ethnic minorities, there is still one big benefit to diversity training. It's great for business. A key cheerleader for this rationale, the consultants McKinsey champions,
the business case for diversity, equity and inclusion,
DEI, not only holds, but grows even stronger. They report a 39% increased likelihood of outperformance for those in the top quartile of ethnic representation versus the bottom quartile. Who can possibly argue with that? Well, Alex Edmonds, Professor of Finance at London Business School.
These studies make the most basic errors, but due to confirmation bias, which is the temptation to accept something uncritically if we want it to be true, these are accepted and lapped up even though there are big errors. So just let me give an example. So their measure of performance is profitability. That's not a bad measure, but you could also look at long-term shareholder return. You could also look at sales growth. There's lots of other valid measures. And so the concern here is McKinsey may well have just run lots of different tests and you cherry pick the one result that is the strongest and you hide everything else. And then it just turns out even the one that they presented because they thought it was the strongest is actually much flimsier. And so I think this is really problematic because this means that this crusade is based on fake information. Once an idea gets into your head, it's quite difficult to shake. And so this happens throughout science, is that there are papers which are later found to be fraudulent, but people still believe in them. Also, it makes investors' job easy because how do you assess the quality of a board of directors? You just look at their gender. You don't need to look at their credentials, their skill set, their time commitment. You mainly will look at their gender.
Things had to change, but it didn't have to be this way. Diversity could have included diversity of opinions, which is good for business. The George Floyd outrage could have powered evidence-based programs that actually make a difference, while celebrating and reflecting the heterogeneous society we live in. DEI didn't have to scream racist at white men, and then expect everything to be peachy. And it didn't have to affect the nuanced cultures underpinning our emergency services. Lincolnshire would have one more policeman on the beat. Sam Pick has quit the force.
And it constantly felt like you were putting your chips in, all in, on a casino, and just rolling the dice and seeing what was going to happen. And the funny thing is, response policing is very dangerous. There's things I've done in policing where certainly one incident where I have come that close to being dead, and plenty of others where there's been assaults and so on. And it is dangerous work, but it's often underestimated how dangerous it is. I was always fine with that. I understood it. I didn't dismiss it, and I'm not going to say I wasn't afraid sometimes, but I understood it, and that was part of the job. But the part I really couldn't accept, and in the end was genuinely afraid of, was what would happen if I managed to step on a proverbial identity politics landmine. Because I knew the consequences of that would be really, really damaging for me, my family, and the people around me. If we could focus on diversity, inclusion, and attracting as many different police officers from as many different backgrounds as we can and making them feel included, it would be great. That would be fantastic. Where it has gone horribly and catastrophically wrong is the E bit, where they have tried to force outcomes into situations where they're not necessarily suited.
In the next and final episode of White Men Can't Work, your handy guide to dodging microaggressions.
You can't use the term millennials. What would you say instead?
I have no idea. Why is millennial offensive? Do they say that? Do they explain?
Yes, let me leaf through one of the 26 pages.
And having ranted and raved like an entitled white-ish man, some solutions to replace DEI with inspiration from the US Army. Finally, in this polarised world, it's not so easy standing up for free speech. It would mean a lot if you could subscribe to my YouTube channel. Till next time.